You're listening to episode 117 of the D6 podcast.
I don't know anything more important in our society or in the kingdom of God than to help the church, help the family.
Discipleship is not an event, it's a way of life.
And one day it just hit me that discipleship at home was not about doing more. It was about inviting Christ into what we were already doing.
The goal of family ministry is not families sitting on the couch holding hands and singing Kumbaya. The ultimate goal is families that love God, love people, and make disciples of all peoples.
So that's why you're here. You're here to say 1 hour a week, as significant and as awesome as it is, we know that it's not enough and we want to be intentional with every hour.
You're listening to the D6 podcast. Here's your hosts, Ron Hunter and Jeremy Lee.
This is the family ministry podcast that helps you connect the church and home. And we are going to be talking about connection today, Ron, but it's a different kind of connection. We're going to talk about grandparents and how they connect with the families of their grandkids.
When there's difficulties in the connections, not just how to connect every day, but when there's difficulties.
You know, and this is a real life thing. This is very real life. And we have today, I would say, in the family ministry world, one of the very clear experts in the grandparent ministry conversation. This is Larry Fowler, who I clearly remember, well, it's not that clear since I'm having to hesitate, but like 3 or 4 years ago, I'm guessing. Is that about the time we started here?
That is.
And Larry became a grandparent himself. I think it ignited a passion.
It did.
And he began this coalition, and it has been a success.
That's right. In fact, you know, for people who are out there writing on and speaking on the topic with any credibility, you could probably count the experts on one hand.
Yes.
It's not a lot. There's a good number of grandparenting books out there, even though, you know, one has observed that there might not have been. There really have been, but I would say credible books. That's a key area in there, credible speakers. Larry Fowler, Josh Mulhaville, Tim Kimmel, just to name a few. I'm probably leaving out some, but those are some of my favorites who speak on this topic and have written on this topic with insight in a way that anybody could use. And Larry Fowler has not just jumped on the mantra of grandparenting. He's done with it what we've done with D6. You attack it from the different lenses or viewpoints that ministry needs.
Yes.
And he's been brilliant about it.
Here's what I love about this, though, is it is on the local church level, probably still not as addressed as it could be.
No, exactly right.
We continue to talk about this. Larry's been on our podcast multiple times because we want to get this into the heads and hearts of ministers. But listen, this is a no-brainer. It's a no-brainer.
It is because, and let me tell personal here, I speak a good bit, travel, and speak in churches and conferences. And almost without exception, when I'm done speaking, I've delivered some type of D6 message. And almost inevitably, in a close of one of my D6 messages, I'll say something to the effect of, I know if you're like me, many of you would love to have heard this message 20 years ago, 25 years ago, and would have done some parenting intentionality different than what you may have. And I usually give them some remarks for how to move forward. But I inevitably, at every conference, every church I'm at, somebody comes up to me and says, I so needed to hear this. I've encountered this problem with my child, and they begin to talk about their adult children who are not in church, not serving God, and they don't know what to do because of the sin issues that they are facing in their lives. They feel like they are either would be agreeing with them, or they would be not knowing how to navigate it, or they've been blocked out of their lives. I mean, this happens every single time. And the reason why I think the churches need to pay attention to this is there are a lot of people in your church that are 40 plus with very difficult circumstances with their adult kids.
Yes. And here is the scenario that we discussed in this interview, and it is so common. And if you think about it, it makes sense.
Yeah.
A young couple in their 20s or 30s has a baby.
Yep.
And in a lot of ways, they're still babies themselves. They raise that child, making mistakes along the way, and none of us go through the parenting journey without doing a little bit of collateral damage because we're all sinful humans.
That's right.
In that process, though, child becomes an adult and begins to realize, oh, there's some places where I was hurt, or I didn't get what I needed, or I just need to deal with this. And in that process of dealing with it, tension is created, hopefully temporarily, between adult child and parent.
Right.
That adult child becomes a parent themselves. Now, that original now grandparent couple has a lot of energy and love to give to that little grandbaby.
And learned wisdom.
But adult parent is hesitant.
Yeah.
Because they're dealing with their stuff now.
That's right.
And that scenario creates that tension we're going to discuss with Larry.
Yes. That adult child could be that scenario. It could be an adult prodigal child. They can be an adult child who was never raised in church and mom and dad has recently found church and just they don't have anything in common. There's so many areas that can contribute to tension, but the scenario you're going to paint applies to every one of them by and large, 75 to 80% of the time.
So we're going to talk grandparenting right after the break. Now, before we go to the break, I know there's a price deadline coming up for our budget-conscious listeners if they're wanting to attend the D6 conference with us this year. And by the way, if you do, come to the interview booth and say hello. Let me know you listen to the podcast because I love it when we do that. I love to talk to you and get to know our listeners at the conference. But if you want to come and you don't have a lot of money, then this is the time to get going on it because a price deadline's coming, which means the price goes up really soon. So go check d6conference.com. But I think this fits today because you love at the D6 conference to use that term generational discipleship. And grandparenting ministry is generational by definition.
That's right. And Deuteronomy 6 includes 5 of those generations.
Talk about that for a second.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, Deuteronomy 6, we tend to think it's only about parents.
I do,
But in there it says not only to your children, but your children's children and your children's children's children. It literally sets up for grandparenting right in that passage. So the moment your children grow up, you and I have talked about the 4 C's of parenting before. You know, that last stage is consultant when they turn 18. You're not removed from their lives. You know, sometimes what Larry's talking about, there's that distant, but there's still some attachment. How do we get back into that consultant? How do we get back into speaking in their world? We're not removed. We still have a responsibility. It's not just to our adult children, but also to our grandchildren and their grandchildren. So the Bible's clear on that. In fact, Psalm 78 is probably my favorite passage to it. It says we're to be making decisions and values today for the children of the children that have not yet been born, the generation yet to be born.
I love that. One of my spiritual mentors taught me that we are, as parents, spiritual patriarchs and matriarchs for the next 3 to 4 generations.
That's right.
That means what we do as parents today matters.
That's right.
So listen, we are after the break are going to hear from Larry Fowler, and he's going to talk to us about a very real pain point that people in your church are feeling. Both parents and grandparents and grandchildren, all 3 feel the pain of this, and we're going to get in depth with it after the break. We'll talk to you then.
The DNA of D6 provides any church an opportunity to plan, strategize, evaluate, and refine their approach to discipleship and family ministry. Dr. Ron Hunter's book shares vital philosophy and strategy built on the foundation of Deuteronomy 6. Readers will be able to build on this foundation to disciple every generation in their church. Each book comes with a free church health assessment. Visit d6family.com to find helpful coaching sessions and resources, and order your copy today.
Well, everybody, my friend Larry Fowler is with us today. We're going to have a great conversation about a subject that he loves a lot, grandparenting. But today we're going to talk about What happens when the grandparenting relationship is distant and the grandparent wants that to change? How can they change it? What can they do? So we're going to be talking about that today. But before we get into it, Larry Fowler is the founder of the Legacy Coalition. His vision for a national grandparenting ministry brought together a gifted team of family, children's, and youth ministry leaders to launch the movement. He's authored books on children's and family ministry, regular main stage speaker and workshop presenter at many different conferences. In 2012, recognized for his lifetime contribution to children's ministry in America with the National Legacy Award from INCM. What an awesome, cool thing! That had to be a cool moment when you got that.
Well, I didn't think it floored me. Had no idea. So,
well, congratulations on that. So, I'd like to spend some time helping churches that want to minister to grandparents and want to speak to them. And actually, I'm hoping grandparents will listen to this interview just straight away. And how do you recommend that a grandparent begins to repair a broken relationship with their adult child so that they can have a better relationship with their grandchild?
Well, how about if I give you a little background first?
Let's do it.
Do that. So when there's a break in the relationship or there's a barrier to grandparents influencing grandkids, the word that kind of summarizes all of it is distance. And sometimes it's fairly easy to overcome if it's geographical distance, but what you're talking about is when there's relational distance or even worse, spiritual distance. And if there's both relational and spiritual distance, we're talking something that's really, really hard. And how do you overcome that distance? So even though you may live close, if you're not connecting with them relationally, then how in the world do you influence grandkids? And the spiritual distance is really hard. I had a lady come to me after a session that I taught about a year or so ago, and she said, how do I influence my grandkids? My son has told me that I can see my granddaughter or I can talk to her about God, but I can never do both, because the minute I mention God to my granddaughter, I'll never be allowed to see her again. So that's spiritual distance. And then, of course, relational distance is often, when there's a choice made and the grandparents don't think it's a good choice, and so they tell them, or they just grow apart, life choices and stuff like that. So that's what we're talking about, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So how do you recommend, for an adult child, I think it's hard to give parents freedom to change. It's as if they're locked into their childhood and it's hard to forgive. So how can a grandparent overcome that?
Well, where I would start from is to recognize that there's a difference between being a parent and a grandparent. And grandparents are still parent noun, but they have to stop parenting verb. They have to start grandparenting. Grandparent is a verb. And they have to recognize this is different, and they have a new role. So when you're a parent, Jeremy, you have control of your kids. You have God-given authority and control over your kids. And a wise parent gradually gives up control over the years that a child is growing up. But you want to replace control with something called influence. And so you want control to go down and then influence to go up. Well, when you're a grandparent, when your kids become adults, basically what that means is you have no control over them. You've relinquished control because they now have their own home and they're out on their own. So the question with grandparents, first of all, has to be, what's my role? And my role is one of influence, not one of control. So I have to stop parenting, to start thinking, how am I going to influence them? And influence does come through a relationship. It doesn't come through control and authority. It comes through a relationship. So the strategy has to be, how do I reconnect? How do I develop the relationship that then allows me to be in a position of influence?
I love that. So for the grandparents that are listening that wish they had the words to say to get their relationship with their adult child moving towards a healthy place, give them some words to say. How do they approach that conversation with the adult child?
Well, first of all, rather than specific words, because the situations are all over everywhere, it's better to talk about words that fit a pattern and that fit a principle. So again, the principle is, what can you say to begin to reestablish and build a relationship? It may be something as simple as finding a non-spiritual common bond that you have. Maybe I mean, if it's grandpa and a son-in-law, then maybe it's a sports team, maybe it's hunting, maybe it's fishing, but you take something that you have and you begin to find a common connection and to build a relationship from that. Probably in most cases, asking forgiveness might be a good place to start too. Most of us that are our age understand that when there are conflicts, there's rarely 100% fault all on one side of the conflict. And even if it's 98-2, the 2% needs to be asked for forgiveness for. And so grandparents may need to start by just saying, you know what, I was wrong in this, or if I was wrong, I don't see it, but if I want to ask for forgiveness. But asking forgiveness may be a point of restarting a conversation.
What if there's a legitimate stubbornness on the part of the grandparent and they're missing out on the relationship because they want to be right and they want to prove a point? To lovingly talk to them for a second about stubbornness.
Well, if grandparents have an adult child that's walked away from God, here's my premise. My premise would be that they probably cut off other Christian relationships too. So if they've walked away from God, they probably don't have a bunch of Christian friends. They have a bunch of non-Christian friends. That leaves the parent, the grandparent, as probably the only Jesus in their lives. And that's only there because they're family, and so that relationship's part of it. Now, so let's go on the premise that then the grandparents are Jesus to this young person that's walked away. What does that mean? Well, in John 1:14, we're told Jesus was full of grace and truth. I think that it means, if you're going to be Jesus to them, it means you have to be full of grace and full of truth. And that's what it means. Jesus was both of those. But Jesus didn't always lead with one or the other. He actually would have a strategy in dealing with people. Think about the disciples. He often led with truth with them. And with the Pharisees, he led with truth. He just, you generation of vipers, that's not leading with grace. That's true. That's leading with truth. But with sinners, 100% of the time he led with grace. And he actually withheld the truth often in order to lead with grace so they would get to the point of accepting truth. And one of the greatest stories about that's the story of the woman caught in adultery. Remember, these guys brought this woman to Jesus, and they said she was caught in the very act, and said, Jesus, the law says to stone her. What do you say? Now, what were they doing? They were asking Jesus to pronounce truth. And Jesus refused to do it. He actually started writing in the sand. And I've often wondered, what did he write in the sand? Well, I think he started writing some names of women they'd been messing around with. That's my personal theory. And so they see Mary Ann, and this guy goes running off, and and pretty soon all the guys are gone. And then Jesus says, where are your accusers? The woman says, they're all gone. He said, then neither do I condemn you. Now, to all that point, all that time, Jesus was leading with grace. And at the very end, this woman who needed to know and accept truth, at the very end, he says, now go and sin no more. And so even though Jesus was 100% grace, 100% truth, he led with grace so that truth could be heard. So to the grandparent that wants so badly for their adult child to receive truth, it doesn't work to pound them over the head with truth.
Yeah.
You need to try a different tactic and try one that Jesus did. And the idea is lead with grace so that they will get to the point where you are in a relationship of influence, and then they'll accept truth. So that's my advice to them. I happen to think following Jesus' pattern, his example, is a pretty good thing to try to do.
Yeah. I love that. So what other advice would you give to a grandparent in this situation? This is your last shot to help them out.
Well, that last one was a really big one, to be able to do that. Okay. So let's summarize again. Focus on the relationship. Rather than trying to control them, understand influence comes through a relationship, build up that relationship, and then think about, what would grace look like for me in this situation? Could mean shutting up. Could mean saying I'm sorry. Could It could mean showing a genuine interest in something that they're interested in. But maybe the first thing you say is, you know what, our relationship hasn't been good. And I'm really sorry because I know I've contributed some to that. And I want you to know I would like to be a friend. I'd like to have a relationship with you. And even then, there will be some of our adult kids who say, I don't want it. But if you say it again and again, and you begin to show that you're interested in a genuine relationship, and it doesn't feel to them like you're simply trying to get close so you can pound them over the head with truth again, then maybe the doors will begin to open, and the Holy Spirit can use your words to make a difference in their lives.
Awesome. So you guys have to believe, if you're listening to this, that there must be a passion in this man for this subject, or he wouldn't be speaking this way about it. And you're actually right. Larry has begun something called the Legacy Coalition, which is solely focused on helping churches connect with grandparents. So tell us about the Legacy Coalition real quick before we go.
Well, we started in January of 2016, and we want to do a couple things. Our phrase we use a lot is we grandparent on purpose.
Yeah, that's good.
And so grandparent's a verb there, but we want to get Christian grandparents to become intentional Christian grandparents. We want them to take that step into intentionality where they're doing more than helping raise the kids. They're doing more than sugaring them up and sending them home. They're doing more than just visiting, seeing their ball games and stuff, but they're actually intentional in passing on faith. Then we want to see churches realize that grandparenting matters. And by that we mean we want church leaders to recognize the grandparent-grandchild relationship is a significant avenue for discipleship. Grandparents are second only to parents in their potential to influence kids spiritually. Way more than any Sunday school teacher, way more than any youth worker, because they have their heart and their love and they're with them for all of childhood. That's a primary, that's a great formula for deep, deep influence. And we want churches to recognize that and to begin to equip and encourage that relationship.
I love it. If you guys want to learn more about this, you can go to legacycoalition.com. Our guest has been Larry Fowler. Thank you so much for being with us.
You're welcome, my friends. Great to see you again, spend some time with you.
Yes, sir.
What if you could multiply your ministry 168 times over? We have a way for you to do that today. We believe that true discipleship is attained through diligently studying God's Word and applying the Scriptures to your daily life. Spending 1 hour each week out of 168 in a worship service is simply not enough. D6 devotional study guides are here to help. Each week, everyone in your family studies the same theme, with lessons and devotions appropriate to each age level. Moms and dads will love the devotions and articles as conversation starters. Children will love reading and playing games in their own devotional study guide. Families will love spending time together during the week discussing and studying the Scriptures. To learn more about the D6 devotional magazines, you can go to d6family.com/D6curriculum.
All right. I think at this point, if you have resonated with this conversation, you need to look up the Legacy Coalition.
Yeah.
You need to become more active in what Larry Fowler is doing. And you should consider sending your seniors. He likes to say, I'd like to transform senior ministry into grandparenting ministry. So you should consider sending your key influential senior ministry leaders off to the Legacy Coalition, the Legacy Conference, and let them come back and start retooling this conversation in your church.
Yep. And if you want to step one this week, you say, okay, I'm down. Y'all have inspired me. I want to do something. What do I need to do? If you want a step one, identify the empty nesters in your church. Just go to somebody who knows your database, go to the adult minister, the pastor, somebody who's with the adults more and say, hey, what is a good list of people who are active, involved, and interested in what we do in our church that are empty nesters, that have had children that are now adult children? I'd like to have that list and then start recruiting.
That's right.
Because they have the potential to be amazing volunteers. And you will start to understand and relate to grandparents when they start to volunteer in your ministry. It's a great first step to get connected and to bring generations into your ministry. you might be surprised at how cool grandparents can be as volunteers in your children or student ministry.
So next week we have Dr. Laverne Tolbert, who will be speaking on that book that has sold thousands and thousands and thousands. I don't even know. We need to know before we get to next week how many that has sold. I'm not sure we can find that as public data, but my memory says it's in its like 17th printing with Zondervan. I'll look that up and make sure before we come back.
This lady is special. If you've listened to our podcast at all in the past, she's been on a couple other times. You know I am a huge fan, and this interview was just as good as all the rest. You're going to enjoy it. We'll see you guys next week. Have a great week of ministry.
You've been listening to the D6 Podcast. You can learn more about D6 at d6family.com. And if you're a minister, we invite you to join the D6 Leader Network by going to d6leader.net.